Hola chicos. In this video, I'm going to talk about when you use the subjunctive in adjective clauses. Now, an adjective clause is a clause that's going to describe a noun. And we've got three main uses of when we would use a subjunctive when we have an adjective clause. And I'm going to show those to you real quick right now, and I'll come back to it. So first one is referring to a non-specific noun when you're describing something that we're not talking about a specific noun for. Or as we pretentiously call it, an unknown antecedent. Now, this is the one that we're going to spend the most time on. We'll get back to it in just a moment. Second use, we're just asking whether or not something exists. Does it exist? Again, I'll go over this in a little bit. And then plain old, it doesn't exist. These are all instances when you would use the subjunctive in an adjective clause. So, as I said, an adjective clause is something that's going to describe a noun. Now, it could be something simple as, maybe a color. Tengo una carpeta que es roja, right? I have a folder that is red. Simply, the que es roja is the adjective clause describing the folder. So, a lot of times we would probably just say, tengo una carpeta roja, probably, but sometimes just something simple like that. There's not an adjective, a simple adjective to describe a noun. So we have an adjective clause, an entire phrase to go with it, with a verb. So this first one, as I said, is called when we're talking about an unknown antecedent. So a clause that's referring to something, whereas antecedent is unknown, meaning it's not a specific thing. And I think the best way to kind of talk about this is to mention or to give you some examples. So you see this first one here. We've got tengo una casa que tiene una piscina. Now, this part right here, the que tiene una piscina, that is the adjective clause. That is the part that is describing my house. Tengo una casa que tiene una piscina. I don't have a pool, really, but in the example, though, we're just saying we're describing this house. What is this house like? It is a house. I could simply say tengo una casa bonita. Tengo una casa que es bonita. Or I could even say I have a house that has a pool, describing the house. Tengo una casa que tiene una piscina. Now, I am referring to a specific house. So this whole little phrase here is describing that casa. Now, if this casa is unknown, we would use a subjunctive. But we know which house I'm talking about. I am referring to a specific house. So because it is known, and we're talking about something specific, that's why it is tiene in this clause. It's tiene right here. It's in the indicative because it's known. Now, we go to the next sentence, we're going to see the verb is going to be very similar. Our sentence is very similar, but I'm using the verb tenga in that case because in this one, when I talk about the sentence, I'm going to refer to the house again. This is still my adjective clause right here. Quiero una casa que tenga una piscina. Now, this clause is referring to this casa. Now, what house am I talking about? What casa am I talking about here? It is not specific. I'm not talking about a specific house. Therefore, when I describe it, we use the subjunctive to describe it. Now, so quiero una casa que tenga una piscina. That is the way you have to say it. I want a house that has a pool. This casa in this sentence is what we're talking about when we say the unknown antecedent. That's what we're talking about. The casa is the antecedent here, and it is unknown, meaning that it's not a specific house that we are talking about. We're just saying I want a house. Which one? I don't know. Nothing specific here. Let's look at a couple more examples before we move on. Busco el vestido que está en el maniquí. So I'm looking for the dress that's on the mannequin, without being a smart aleck and saying that, oh, it's on the mannequin. No, we're just like the same one. So there's a certain one that's on the mannequin, and that's the one I want. I am talking about a specific dress. Now, so when I am describing this dress, this is how I describe the dress. It's the one that's on the mannequin. I want that same kind, that same one. That's why our verb in this case is está. Whoops, that's kind of cool, but accidental. Here, right here, está. That's the indicative because we are talking about a specific dress. So when I go back and I refer to the vestido aquí, I am talking about a specific dress. Let's go to the next one. Necesito un vestido que sea diferente que el tuyo. I want a dress, or I need a dress that is different than yours. So we're referring to the dress again, we're describing the dress, but we do this with the subjunctive because we're not talking about a specific dress. What dress is going to be different than yours? I don't know. I don't have a specific one in mind. That's why we use sea here to show that we're not talking about a specific dress. Now, I want to highlight a couple things. It's not bad, but it's not great. A great way to go with. When we have a lot of times, I'll give you little stars here with our articles. We've got una, el, and un. Especially in the bottom two, you can see the difference. When we have our right here, busco el vestido, and that first part here, and necesito un vestido. When we have busco el vestido, the el, I'm looking for the dress. A lot of times when you hear the word el or la, los or las, the definite article, you know, by definition, it's defined. It's a definite article. It's defined. We're talking about a specific one, usually. When we go to the indefinite, even more obvious, I think here, necesito un vestido, I need a dress. We're not talking about a specific one there. So it is a lot of times when you're trying to figure out whether you should use the subjunctive or the indicative in the adjective clause, it does help to look at the article with it. But of course, as you can see, the first two, there's already a contradiction to that rule. We have una casa and una casa. They're both una casa, but we still use the subjunctive with one and the indicative with the other. So the context overall is what's most important. But it is, I'd still say it works out for you, you know, the majority of the time, the el versus un in this case, and the busco el vestido versus necesito un vestido. I'm looking for the dress versus I need a dress. The definite article, the, el, la, los, las, they can be a good clue for you, but it's not an absolute rule. Okay, I'm going to move on now and go back to our second rule that we kind of mentioned briefly in the beginning. Whether or not something exists, that question is also going to require the subjunctive. Now you might be able to throw this into the whole is the antecedent unknown? It might fall into that rule as well, but I think it's easier to just kind of break it down and just say that if we're asking the question whether or not this person exists or this thing exists, like in my examples here, we should use a subjunctive with it. First one here, this is something I say in class all of the time. We're finishing up a quiz. I'll ask, you know, hay una persona que necesite más tiempo. And the reason you may have thought I was just saying it wrong the whole time because I was conjugating necesitar in the present subjunctive, and at that point you had not learned the subjunctive conjugation. But hay una persona que necesite más tiempo. What I'm asking is there anyone that needs more time? I don't know if this person exists. So I use the subjunctive. Whenever you're asking about whether this person or thing exists, we use the subjunctive when asking it in the adjective clause. In this case, the adjective clause is not with a que, it's with a quien. You say, ¿quién necesita más tiempo? The second example, is there a restaurant close that has healthy food? Hay un restaurante cerca que tenga comida saludable. That we use tenga in this one because we're asking whether or not this close restaurant exists. We don't know. You know, is there one? Whether there is or there isn't, it doesn't matter. We still ask that question. You know, is there somebody, you know, is there a student that speaks Chinese? Hay un estudiante quien hable chino. We'll use the subjunctive. Whenever we're asking if this person exists, we use the subjunctive. Again, I don't think this one's as difficult to get down as the other ones, or as the first one. And the third one, plain old doesn't exist. If it just doesn't exist, there isn't any of them, then we use a subjunctive when we describe it. There isn't anyone, or there's, you know, literally there aren't none person, you know, there isn't anyone that needs more time. So let's say I'm asking, you know, hay alguien que necesite más tiempo? or hay una persona que necesita más tiempo. The response, no. No hay ninguna persona. Just because this person does not exist, when I describe that person that doesn't exist, we use the subjunctive to describe them. No hay ninguna persona que necesite más tiempo. But it's necesite, we're describing, that needs more time is describing the person, which doesn't exist. There isn't any restaurant that serves Mexican food here. Just doesn't exist. So when we describe the restaurant, we're going to need to use a subjunctive. This is sirva from the verb servir. Ir I stem changing verb, conjugated accordingly. Third person singular, restaurante. So no hay ningún restaurante que sirva. Got to use a sirva here to describe this restaurant that doesn't exist. If we are asking about whether or not this restaurant exists, it'd still be subjunctive. You know, hay un restaurante que sirva comida mexicana. Does this restaurant exist? And if the answer is no, then we still use the subjunctive in that adjective clause to describe it. Okay, gracias, adios.